All right, so welcome everyone. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into a piece called Boxed Landscape. Cool. We've got some really interesting sources for this one. First, we've got a YouTube video analysis and then excerpts from two different art books.
Yeah, I think those books are, the first one's called Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, Volume 2.
Okay.
And then the second one is called Zen, Art, and Enlightenment, a synthesis of vision and wisdom. I think that's it.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So today's mission, we're going to be looking at this painting called Boxed Landscape and trying to figure out what it all means, the symbolism, the artistic influences, all that good stuff.
Definitely. And I think what's really cool is that all of these sources, even with all their different perspectives, they all seem to agree on one thing,
Okay, what's that?
that this painting is incredibly evocative. It really draws you into this world that's kind of familiar, but also kind of dreamlike, you know?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And the sources do a really great job of describing those visual elements too. Like we're talking dominant golden hues, blurred edges, a sense of like a valley or a ravine. You almost feel like you're peering through a misty window into another world, you know?
Yeah, and you actually touched on something really important there.
Yeah.
The sources really talk about how this boxed landscape, it plays with the boundaries between like representation and abstraction.
Oh, interesting.
So it's not trying to be this like super realistic depiction of a place, right?
Right, yeah.
It's more about capturing like the atmosphere, the light, the emotion even.
Okay, so speaking of influences, the YouTube video analysis mentioned Impressionism, and I'm kind of seeing that, like the focus on the light, the atmosphere, how the colors blend together.
That's a great observation. And, to add a little context here, Impressionism, it was all about capturing the feeling of a fleeting moment, right?
Okay.
So like the subjective experience of the artist. And I think Boxed Landscape, it really shares that same kind of spirit.
I see that, yeah.
It's almost like the artist is inviting us to see this scene through their eyes, like they experienced it.
Right, and I think the art books brought in some interesting connections too, right? They mention artists like George Ingnes, American landscape painter.
Yeah, and he's known for his, I guess you could say, spiritualized depictions of nature. They're really evocative.
And they mentioned Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot too, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
He was a French landscape artist, kind of a pioneer of this thing called the Barbizon School.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of that.
And they were this group of painters
Mm.
who, like, really believed in painting outdoors directly from nature.
Oh, that's cool.
They both kind of used a lot of soft edges and muted colors, which created this sense of tranquility in their work.
Right, and I think their work, just like Boxed Landscape, kind of encourages us to just like slow down and contemplate, maybe find some stillness in the middle of, you know, this busy world.
I totally agree.
And then the books also touched on John Singer Sargent too, that incredible mastery of watercolors. You know, those like loose, airy washes of color.
Yeah, and you see that in Boxed Landscape, too. This feeling of light and movement. It's
Yeah.
almost like the painting itself is breathing.
Right. It's amazing.
It's really remarkable how all these artists, even though they worked in different styles, different time periods, they were all exploring that same thing. The
Yeah.
expressive power of color and brushstrokes. They weren't just copying reality,
Right.
They wanted to capture, like, the essence of it, the emotional impact.
So let's move on to symbolism. This is where things get really interesting for me,
I know, right?
because the sources give all these different interpretations. It could be like a nostalgic setting, a sense of possibility, a path to be discovered,
Right.
even challenges or obstacles represented by those like denser edges. It's almost like the painting is a mirror reflecting our own experiences, wouldn't you say?
It totally is. And that actually brings up a really important question. What is it about this piece that resonates with you the most?
That's a good question.
What feelings, memories does it evoke for you? Does it give you a feeling of peace?
Maybe, yeah.
Or maybe a sense of longing for something beyond just, the everyday?
You know what struck me from those art books was their whole exploration of Zen philosophy and the I Ching, specifically how those relate to Boxed Landscape.
Oh, interesting.
Like they connected it to all these concepts.
Right.
Intuition, interconnectedness, the cyclical nature of change.
Yeah, it's as if the artwork itself is almost like a visual representation of these ancient wisdom traditions.
Mm.
Like, take, for example, that central corridor.
Right.
That could be seen as a source of hope, serenity, maybe even a path towards enlightenment almost.
Wow.
And then that surrounding layered terrain, that could represent all the complexities of, life's journey.
I love that idea. And something that really resonated with me was like the idea of this artwork being a portal to heightened awareness, you
Yeah.
know? It's like the artist is inviting us to step outside of our usual ways of seeing things and just experience the world with fresh eyes. It reminds us that there's always more to discover, both in the artwork and within ourselves.
That's what's so beautiful about art. It
Yeah.
awakens us to new possibilities. It challenges our assumptions, and ultimately it helps us see the world and ourselves in a whole new light.
You mentioned earlier how that central corridor represents a path to serenity.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what visual elements specifically kind of contribute to that feeling?
Sure. One thing that really stands out to me is how that corridor is bathed in light,
Right? Yeah.
especially compared to those darker, denser areas around it. It really draws your eye inward. It
Yeah.
creates a sense of depth and invites you to feel a sense of movement. And those soft, blended brushstrokes, those kind of enhance that sense of tranquility too, you know?
That makes sense. And it kind of ties back to what we were saying about Impressionism and that emphasis on capturing light and atmosphere.
Absolutely. And another interesting element is the use of color. That corridor is mainly rendered in shades of gold, which often symbolizes enlightenment and spiritual awakening.
Oh, that's interesting. I never really thought about the specific symbolism of gold in that context.
Yeah, it adds another layer to that interpretation of the corridor as this path to serenity, you know?
Right, right. And speaking of symbolism, one of the sources talked about this whole idea of boxed landscapes and connected it to the I Ching hexagram Li. It's a pretty complex concept, but I think it basically comes down to finding clarity and illumination amidst challenging circumstances.
It's like, yeah, finding the light in the darkness.
Exactly. Now, for those of us who might not be so familiar with the I Ching, could you maybe explain what a hexagram is and why this particular one, Li, is relevant to boxed landscape?
Yeah, so the I Ching, it's this really old Chinese divination text, you know?
Okay.
And it's all based on this concept of yin and yang, which is the interplay of these complementary forces in the universe.
Right.
And a hexagram is basically this figure made up of 6 horizontal lines. And each of those lines can either be broken or unbroken, which represents either yin or yang.
Okay.
And Li, the hexagram that's mentioned in the source, is made up entirely of broken lines.
Oh, wow.
And it symbolizes fire, light, and clarity. It's a time for illumination and breakthroughs, basically.
Okay, so how does all of that connect to boxed landscape?
Well, the source kind of suggests that the painting visually echoes the imagery of the Lie hexagram,
Right.
especially with its really bright, luminous center surrounded by those darker edges.
Okay.
It's almost like the painting itself embodies this whole idea of finding clarity and illumination in challenging circumstances, which is, a central theme in Zen philosophy as well.
Yeah, and that brings us back to that whole idea of the artwork functioning as a mirror, right?
Yeah.
Reflecting not just the artist's inner world, but our own, too.
Exactly. And that brings up a really important question. What are the boxed landscapes in your own life?
Oh, wow.
What are the self-imposed boundaries, those limitations that you might be clinging to?
That's a great question. And I think this whole deep dive, it's not just about understanding one single painting, you know?
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about connecting with those like universal truths that resonate across different cultures and time periods. It's about the power of art to like transcend boundaries, start conversations, challenge us to think differently and, connect with our own humanity on a much deeper level.
I couldn't agree more. Art has this incredible ability to connect us to something bigger than ourselves. It reminds us that we're all human and inspires us to live, more consciously, creatively, and authentically.
We're always telling ourselves stories about, who we are, what we believe, what's possible for us. But sometimes those stories can become kind of limiting, like
Yeah.
those boxed landscapes the sources we're talking about. They can hold us back from really reaching our full potential.
So how do we break free from those limiting beliefs?
Yeah.
How do we embrace a more expansive way of thinking?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, I think one answer might be mindfulness. By cultivating a practice of present moment awareness, we can kind of deconstruct those beliefs that are holding us back and open ourselves up to new possibilities.
Right.
We can learn to see beyond those self-imposed frames and embrace, the vastness of our own being.
Yeah, we're not defined by, our circumstances or our past experiences or the labels that other people try to put on us.
Exactly.
So in a way, boxed landscape can be like a guide on this journey of self-discovery.
It's a great way to think about it.
It's like a reminder that even within boundaries, even with constraints, there's always that potential for beauty, expansion, and connection.
It really is a testament to how resilient we are as humans. our ability to find meaning and purpose even when we're faced with limitations.
It's a call to action, to embrace our creativity, to challenge our perceptions, and to live with more intention, more awareness.
And one of the sources even suggested that boxed landscape is like a self-portrait in disguise, reflecting not just the artist's inner world, but our own as well. So, if we were to look at this painting as a reflection of ourselves, what does it tell us about who we are and who we want to be?
That is a really thought-provoking question. And maybe the answer isn't even found within the painting itself, but in our own unique responses to it.
I think you're right.
What emotions does it bring up for you? What memories does it trigger? What aspirations does it ignite? It's like the painting's holding up this mirror and asking, who are you? What do you see? It's like an invitation to delve deep into our own subconscious, to explore the landscapes of our hearts and minds.
And through that process of self-discovery, through exploring our inner landscapes, we can start to see beyond the boxes that we've built for ourselves.
Yeah.
We can step into a more expansive, more authentic way of being.
It's about realizing that those boundaries we see so often are actually just illusions. They're
Right.
created by our own minds.
And as we learn to see through those illusions,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to infinite possibilities.
We talked about the influence of William Turner earlier, especially his mastery of watercolors.
Yeah, the sources mention that.
But I think it'd be interesting to explore those parallels between his work and boxed landscape a bit further.
Definitely. William Turner, he was a prominent English romantic painter,
Right?
and he was really known for his groundbreaking use of watercolor.
Oh, yeah.
He would push the boundaries of the medium, creating these really atmospheric and expressive landscapes.
He was a master of capturing light and atmosphere. His paintings have this ethereal, almost dreamlike quality to them.
I see that.
And I see something similar in boxed landscape, especially in the way the edges are blurred and the forms seem to emerge from the light itself. It's like the painting is shimmering right before your eyes.
You're spot on. Turner, he was a master of using light and color to create depth and form. He often used these luminous washes of color and minimal lines, letting the light define the shapes and create that sense of movement within the painting.
Yeah. And boxed landscape seems to share that same sensibility, wouldn't you say? The artist isn't focused on meticulously recreating a specific location.
Right.
It's about capturing its essence, the feeling that it evokes.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of boxed landscape, blending all these different artistic influences. It's not just about Impressionism or Zen philosophy, but also drawing from the legacy of artists like Turner and finding new ways to express the power of light, color, and emotion in landscape painting.
It's incredible how boxed landscape weaves together these different threads of artistic inspiration, from Impressionism to Zen philosophy to the legacy of William Turner.
It really is.
And speaking of weaving threads, what are your thoughts on how the artist uses color in this piece?
Well, the use of color in boxed landscape is really captivating. The artist mostly uses warm, earthy tones, which create a sense of tranquility and harmony.
Right.
And like we talked about earlier, the use of gold is particularly symbolic. It represents enlightenment and spiritual awakening. And the way those colors blend together with those soft, diffused edges creates a sense of atmosphere and depth that just pulls you right into the painting.
It's almost like you can feel the warmth of the sun on your skin and the coolness of the shadows as you journey through that landscape.
You get it. The colors evoke this visceral response.
What about the way the artist uses light and shadow?
Oh, the interplay of light and shadow in boxed landscape is masterful. Notice how the light just seems to emanate from that central corridor. It casts this warm glow on the surrounding landscape.
Right.
It creates a sense of depth and dimension, drawing your eye inward and creating that feeling of movement in those darker areas.
Right.
Those create a sense of mystery and intrigue. It's like there are hidden depths waiting to be explored.
It's like the artist is using light and shadow to guide us through this journey in the painting, leading us toward that central corridor of serenity and illumination.
Exactly. And what about the composition itself? How do you think that contributes to the overall feeling of the piece?
The composition of boxed landscape is so balanced and harmonious. The central corridor acts as this focal point, drawing your eye inward, creating that sense of perspective. And the surrounding landscape, with those layered forms and kind of undulating lines, it creates a sense of movement and rhythm.
Yeah.
And the way the artist uses the frame of the painting to contain the landscape.
Right.
It adds this feeling of containment and introspection.
I love that. It's like the frame represents those boxes we often build for ourselves,
Yeah.
those limitations we perceive. And the landscape inside, that represents the boundless potential that lies beyond those limitations.
Yeah, it's up to us to decide whether we focus on the frame or on the vastness inside.
Exactly.
Do we let those boundaries define us, or do we see past them and embrace all those infinite possibilities that exist?
That's such a powerful message. It reminds us that we have the power to choose our perspective, to shape our own reality, and to create our own meaning. And boxed landscape can serve as this constant source of inspiration along that journey.
This has been so insightful. I'm so grateful for your expertise and insights. We've covered so much ground, from the artistic influences and symbolism to the connections with Zen philosophy and the I Ching.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
But I think what resonates most with me is the idea of boxed landscape as this mirror,
Me too.
reflecting not just the artist's inner world, but our own as well.
It's about recognizing that we all have those boxed landscapes within us, those self-imposed limitations, those challenges.
Right.
And the artwork, it invites us to contemplate those things, to find that light within the darkness, and ultimately to see beyond those limitations that we might perceive.
It's a call to action to break free from those limiting beliefs, to embrace our creativity, and to live with more intention, more awareness. What are your final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up this part of our deep dive?
As we move forward, I encourage you to keep thinking about boxed landscape. Let the painting be your guide on this journey of self-discovery, of creative exploration, of awakening to all that boundless beauty and potential that lies within you. And remember, those answers that you're searching for, they're not hidden within the frame of the painting. They're within the boundless landscape of your own heart and mind. You know that YouTube video analysis? They made this connection between boxed landscape and the I Ching hexagram lie, and that really stuck with me.
Yeah, I remember that.
They talked about how that hexagram often represents, like, clarity and illumination. And that just makes me think of that bright,
Yeah.
luminous center of the painting. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's a really interesting connection. And it makes me think about how the I Ching, it kind of emphasizes that cyclical nature of change, right?
Right.
The constant back and forth between light and dark, and the whole idea of finding balance within those opposing forces. And when you think about it, box landscape really does visually embody those same principles.
It does, doesn't it? That bright, almost kind of ethereal center, and then surrounded by those darker, denser edges.
Right. It's almost like this tiny little microcosm of the universe itself.
I know, right.
Yeah.
And remember how we talked about that Zen Art and Enlightenment book, and how it mentioned that the artwork can be like a mirror reflecting our own inner world.
Yeah.
So maybe if we, sit with this painting and contemplate that balance, that harmony that's depicted in boxed landscape, we can gain a deeper understanding of how to cultivate those same qualities within ourselves.
Wow. That's a pretty profound thought.
Right. It's like the painting is giving us this subtle guidance on how to live a more balanced and harmonious life.
I like that.
And this whole idea of self-reflection, looking inward,
Yeah.
it's so central to understanding boxed landscape. It's not just about passively looking at it, but actively engaging with it, like letting it spark some introspection. What emotions does it bring up for you? What memories or thoughts come to mind?
It really is like the painting is asking us, hey, what do you see when you look at me? What do you see reflected back at you? It's such a personal experience. And, this whole deep dive, it's not just about understanding this one painting.
It's not, no.
It's about connecting with those like universal truths, the ones that speak to people across different cultures and time periods. It's about recognizing the power of art to like break down barriers, spark conversations, challenge us to think outside the box, and, help us connect with our own humanity on a deeper level.
Absolutely. It's about understanding that art has this incredible ability to connect us to something bigger than ourselves. It reminds us of our shared humanity and, inspires us to live more consciously, more creatively, more authentically.
We're always telling ourselves stories about like who we are, what we believe, what's possible for us, but sometimes those stories can become kind of limiting.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Like those boxed landscapes that the sources talk about, they can prevent us from reaching our full potential. So how do we break free from those limiting beliefs and start to embrace a more expansive way of thinking?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think the answer could lie in mindfulness. If we practice being aware of the present moment, we can start to break down those beliefs that are holding us back and open ourselves up to all sorts of new possibilities.
That makes sense.
We can learn to see beyond those self-imposed frames and embrace the vastness of who we really are. It's about recognizing that we're not just, a sum of our circumstances, our past experiences, or the labels other people try to stick on us.
Right, we're so much more than that.
Exactly. So you could think of boxed landscape as a guide on this journey of self-discovery.
I like that.
It's reminding us that even within boundaries, even when we feel constrained, there's always potential for beauty, growth, and connection.
It's such a hopeful message, you
Yeah.
know?
It really shows how strong we are as humans, our ability to find meaning and purpose, even in the face of limitations. It's like a call to action.
It is, yeah.
Embrace your creativity, challenge your perceptions, and live your life with more intention, more awareness. One of the sources even suggested that boxed landscape can be seen as a self-portrait, but like in disguise.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
It reflects not just the artist's inner world, but our own too. So if we look at this painting as a reflection of ourselves, what does it tell us about who we are and who we want to be?
That's a really interesting question. And maybe the answer doesn't even lie within the painting itself, but in our own individual responses to it.
That's a good point.
What emotions does it make you feel? What memories does it bring back? What dreams or goals does it spark in you? It's like the painting is holding up this mirror saying, hey, who are you? What do you see? It's an invitation to go deep inside ourselves, to explore those inner landscapes of our hearts and minds.
And through that process of self-discovery, of exploring our inner landscapes, we can start to see beyond those boxes that we've maybe unknowingly built for ourselves.
Right.
And we can start to move into a more expansive and more authentic way of being.
It's about realizing that those boundaries we often see, they might just be illusions created by our own minds.
Exactly. And as we start to see through those illusions,
Yeah.
we open ourselves up to a world of infinite possibilities.
You know, earlier we talked a bit about the influence of William Turner, particularly his mastery of watercolor.
Yeah, the sources touched on that briefly.
But I think it would be really cool to dig a little deeper into those parallels between his work and boxed landscape.
Totally. So William Turner, he was this prominent English romantic painter.
Right, right.
And he was known for his revolutionary use of watercolor. He really pushed the boundaries of the medium.
Yeah, I can see that.
He created these incredibly atmospheric and expressive landscapes.
He really was a master at capturing light and atmosphere. His paintings have this ethereal, almost dreamlike quality.
I know, right?
And I see a similar effect in boxed landscape, especially the way the edges are blurred and the forms seem to emerge from the light itself. It's like the painting is shimmering right in front of you.
You're totally picking up on something there. Turner, he was a master of using light and color to create depth and form. He often used these luminous washes of color and very few lines, letting the light itself define the shapes and create a feeling of movement within the painting.
Yeah, box landscape definitely shares that same feeling. It's not about meticulously recreating a specific place.
It's not about the details.
It's about capturing the essence, the feeling it evokes.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of boxed landscape, blending all these different artistic influences. It's not just Impressionism or Zen philosophy. It's also about taking inspiration from artists like Turner and finding new ways to express the power of light, color, and emotion in landscape painting.
It really is amazing how boxed landscape weaves together all these different threads of artistic inspiration, from Impressionism to Zen philosophy to the legacy of William Turner. Speaking of weaving things together, what are your thoughts on how the artist uses color in this piece?
The use of color in boxed landscape is truly captivating. The artist mainly sticks to these warm, earthy tones, which create a sense of tranquility and harmony.
Right, right.
And we've talked about this before, but that use of gold is so symbolic, representing enlightenment and spiritual awakening. And the way the colors blend together with those soft, diffused edges, it just creates a feeling of atmosphere and depth that draws you right into the painting.
It's like you can almost feel the warmth of the sun on your skin and the coolness of the shadows as you're walking through this landscape. The colors are so powerful.
They evoke such a visceral response, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about how the artist uses light and shadow?
The way light and shadow play off of each other in boxed landscape is just masterful. You see how the light seems to come from that central corridor, casting this warm glow over everything around it.
Yeah.
That creates a sense of depth and dimension, leading your eye inward, creating that feeling of movement. And then you have those darker areas, which add a sense of mystery and intrigue. It's like there are these hidden depths just waiting to be explored.
It really feels like the artist is using that light and shadow to guide our journey through the painting. Like they're leading us toward that central corridor of serenity and illumination.
Exactly. And what about the composition itself? How do you think that plays into the overall feeling of the piece?
The composition of Bach's landscape is incredibly balanced and harmonious. The
Hmm.
central corridor serves as this focal point, drawing your eye in and creating a sense of perspective. The surrounding landscape, with its layered forms and kind of wavy lines, creates this sense of movement and rhythm.
Hmm.
And then the way the artist uses the frame of the painting to contain the landscape, it adds this feeling of containment and introspection.
I love that it's like the frame represents those boxes we often create for ourselves, those limitations we think we have. And then the landscape inside, that represents all the potential that exists beyond those limitations.
Exactly. And it's up to each of us to decide whether we're going to focus on the frame or on the vastness inside.
Right.
Are we going to let those boundaries define us, or will we see beyond them and embrace all the infinite possibilities that are out there?
That's such a powerful message. It's a reminder that we have the power to choose how we see things, to create our own reality and our own meaning. And boxed landscape can be this constant source of inspiration along the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's reminding us that even within boundaries, even when things feel limited, there's always potential for beauty, growth, and connection. And it's our job to tap into that potential and build a life that is both meaningful and fulfilling.
This deep dive has been so insightful. I'm so grateful for all your expertise and insights. We've covered so much, from the artistic influences and symbolism to the connections with Zen philosophy and the I Ching.
I've enjoyed it too. It's been a great conversation.
But I think the most important takeaway for me is that idea of boxed landscape acting as a mirror.
Yeah, for me too.
It's not just reflecting the artist's inner world, but our own as well.
It's about realizing that we all have those boxed landscapes inside us, those self-imposed limitations and challenges. And the artwork, it encourages us to think about those things, to find the light in the darkness, and ultimately to see beyond the limitations that we might think are there.
It's a call to action to break free from those limiting beliefs, embrace our creativity, and live our lives with more purpose and more awareness. So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, what are some final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Moving forward, I encourage everyone to just sit with boxed landscape for a while. Let the painting be your guide on a journey of self-discovery, of creative exploration, of awakening to all that incredible beauty and potential that's within you. And don't forget, those answers you're searching for, they aren't tucked away inside the frame of the painting. They're within that limitless landscape of your own heart and mind.
It's incredible how one piece of art can spark so much thought and conversation.
Yes.
As we're wrapping up our deep dive into boxed landscape, maybe we could recap some of the key takeaways we've explored together.
That sounds good. So we started by looking at the different artistic styles at play in boxed landscape. You know, those impressionistic influences and that unique approach to abstraction.
Right. And then we peeled back the layers of symbolism, right? From that sense of nostalgia to the idea of life's challenges being represented metaphorically. And then ultimately we saw that promise of hope and serenity kind of radiating from the core of the artwork.
We also talked about the connections between boxed landscape, Zen philosophy, and the I Ching.
Yeah, those were really interesting.
And we saw how these ancient traditions offer a new way to look at and understand both the painting and ourselves.
But I think the biggest takeaway, and we've touched on this quite a bit, is that invitation to really look inward, to reflect. Boxed landscape makes us think about those self-imposed limitations, those boxed landscapes in our own lives that might be holding us back from experiencing, the fullness of who we are.
And it reminds us that we have the power to choose how we perceive those boundaries.
Right.
We can let them make us feel trapped, or we can see them as chances for growth, expansion, and creative expression.
It really all boils down to perspective, doesn't it?
It does, choosing to look beyond those limitations and embrace all that potential that's inside each of us.
Exactly. So, any final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap things up?
I want to leave you with one last question to think about. How can we use the principles of Zen, the I Ching, and mindfulness to look beyond those frames we put on ourselves in our own lives? Not by breaking free, but by seeing past them.
Yeah, it's about changing our viewpoint, becoming more aware, and realizing that the boundaries we often see might just be illusions created by our own minds. And when we learn to see past those illusions, we open ourselves up to a world of infinite possibilities.
I encourage you to keep exploring boxed landscape. Let its beauty and wisdom kind of wash over you. Go back to the sources we talked about today. Dig deeper into the ideas and see what speaks to you personally.
Let this artwork be your guide on your own journey of self-discovery, creative exploration, and awakening to that unlimited beauty and potential that's within you.
And remember, the answers you're looking for aren't hidden in the frame of the painting. They're within the limitless landscape of your own heart and mind.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And on that note, until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep pushing those boundaries.